Sawatika, greetings, and thank you for taking the time to view my 10th show in my 12-part series of Shut Up and Dance. Today's topic is taboo. A taboo is a vehement prohibition of an action based on the belief that such behavior is either too sacred or too accused for ordinary individuals to undertake. Such prohibitions are present in virtually all societies. The word has been somewhat expanded in the social sciences to strong prohibitions relating to any area of human activity or custom that is sacred or forbidden based on moral judgment and religious beliefs. Breaking a taboo is usually considered objectionable by society in general, not merely a subset of culture. History is always recorded by the victor. I have several examples in which I will present to you with the following questions to follow. Number one, is my example a taboo? Or is my example a ethnic socialization, American style, or a combination of both? My first example, Phyllis Wheatley. Phyllis Wheatley was born in 1753, and she passed away from us on December 5th, 1784. Now you might wonder, who is Phyllis Wheatley? She was born in Africa. She was brought to the United States when she was approximately 8 years of age, the year 1761. She was purchased, bought, sold to a Mr. John Wheatley. Now, John Wheatley was a progressive in the colonies, to the extent that he taught his slaves to both read and write, outwardly breaking the law, but because of his stature, who was going to question John Wheatley. Now, in 1773, Phyllis Wheatley published a book. Can you imagine? The title of the book was Poems on Various Subjects, Religious and Moral. In 1773, ladies and gentlemen, 2 years before the fireworks, we had a slave purchased by a slave owner who taught her how to read and write, and she published a book in 1773, which I might add was a bestseller. My question to you, history is always recorded by the victor. How could this happen that a slave publish a book and then the book becomes a bestseller when slavery, segregation was the law of the land? Not only the law of the land, but if so thought of that you as a slave owner were in violation of the laws with regard to slavery. Can't teach a slave to read or write, etc., etc., etc. Why did this happen? Why does not history reflect the monumental event of this happening? American education cheated me, cheated us all because of her story. And that is just one. So, is Phyllis Wheatley a taboo? Ethnic socialization, American style, or a combination of both? My second case, Mr. Frederick Douglass, born in February 1818. He passed away from us February the 20th, 1895. Frederick Douglass, a slave, sought passage and got to the north, where he then became even more educated, became an abolitionist. And for those who do not know what the word abolitionist is one who is against slavery. There were abolitionists who were black. There were abolitionists who were white. But Frederick took this another step beyond. He published a periodical. He published a book in 1845, which was a bestseller. Need I remind you just the significance of his story up until his bestseller? But even of greater significance, ladies and gentlemen, this man principally was responsible for spreading the spirit of knowledge and education that a slave could aspire to the point where, when we look at the life and times of Frederick Douglass, how many black men and women were so inspired to form and put together publications for their own communities. Even though, at this time, it is against the law to teach a slave to read and write, let alone treat him like a human being. Does history record the journey accurately of Frederick Douglass? Or is he another example? Happenstance. It just so happened. It just so happened. It just so happened. One of a few. I find it funny. His first bestseller, 1845, which brings me to 1853, ladies and gentlemen. the significance of 1853. For all Nebraskans, the city of Omaha was founded. For all men, women, and children of color, at that time, majority slaves, the first of hundreds of institutions, historical black colleges and universities, began with the accreditation of the first historical black college and university in 1853. Kind of makes you wonder why. Why history has failed us. But again, as I say, history is recorded by the victor. Why would the victor inspire beast, otherwise known as chattel, as I am listed in the Constitution of the United States of America? Although I'm not human, I'm still entitled to 3/5 of a vote. Go figure. Only in America. I pose again the question, is it taboo? Is it ethnic socialization, American style? Or a combination of both? My third example, we all know about Rosa Parks. Her commitment, her standing up for the ability to ride on public transportation. But what if I were to tell you that there was a lady approximately 100 years before Rosa Parks who actually broke the line? This lady's name was Elizabeth Jennings. She lived in New York City. New York. Well, there came a time in 1853, Elizabeth was running a little late, and she had to meet her friend at church. However, in those days in New York, the public transportation that was available to citizens, number one, all white trolley cars and trolley cars for colored only. On this particular day, Elizabeth said, "The heck with that. I got to get on this trolley and I got to get to church, got to meet my friend." So she decided to jump on the all-white trolley, which created a stir, as well as you can imagine. However, being that the day was, as New Yorkers would say, hot and humid, the riders of the trolley convinced the trolley car operator to move on because they were beginning to perspire. So he took this with a grain of salt and then allowed Elizabeth to seat, of which Elizabeth quickly popped off, which upset the trolley car driver even more and incensed him to the point where he called a New York policeman to get on the trolley to try to mediate this situation out. Well, while the police officer is tussling and arguing with Elizabeth, as to whether or not she can ride and so on and so forth, the trolley car driver just rode on about his rock. She missed her stop, and finally, on the far, far reaches of New York City, they kicked her off the trolley. Elizabeth was upset. When she arrived back at home, she spoke with her father. Now, her father is a gentleman by the name of Thomas Jennings. Thomas Jennings is important in our history, of which historians give a sentence or two. In 1821, Mr. Thomas Jennings received a patent, one of the first men of color to receive a patent, to be granted a patent. This was in the industry of dry cleaning, from the standpoint that the patent that he sought brought dry cleaning as we know it today was the basics of what dry cleaning is now. In other words, the chemical process. This involved the patent that Thomas Jennings was accorded. Thomas then contacted Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass then contacted Mr. Arthur, a leading abolitionist in New York City. He then contacted Frederick Douglass, told Mr. Jennings to then go see Mr. Arthur. Thomas and his daughter Elizabeth went to see Mr. Arthur. They both thought it was a case that was winnable. 1853, mind you. 1853. He said, my son has just graduated from law school, and I think you should retain him and we take this to court. Mr. Arthur's son just so happened to be Chester A. Arthur. He took Miss Jennings' pleadings for a fee of $250, which you can imagine was a lot of money in those years. They went to court. Juries in those days were men of honor and dignity within the community. No women, 12 white men. Chester A. Arthur presented Miss Jennings' case in front of them. And to no one's surprise, other than the majority of the melanin-less society of New York, Chester A. Arthur won. And in 1854, it became city ordinance and law that people of color dressed can ride on any trolley car. They were not specifically embedded or had to ride the colored only. They could ride the white trolley car. The other significance of Chester A. Arthur? Chester A. Arthur was our 21st president. This happened before. Was our 21st president. Served between 1881 and 1885. Does history record the value and impact of this event? I hold New York City liable. For after this monumental event happened, they used to recognize Elizabeth Jennings. They even named a street after her. But does New York City honor her today? Taboo. Ethnic. Socialization. American style. Or a combination of both. Interesting. My next case is a gentleman referred to. His name, I call him the lawman's lawman, who should be a model for everyone who wears a gun and a badge. This gentleman's name was Bass Reeves. Bass Reeves was born in 1838, and he was with us till the 12th of January, 1910. The significance of Mr. Bass Reeves. He became, was and is, one of the greatest lawmen of all time. He was assigned to the court under a judge in Fort Smith, Arkansas in 1875, and he coincidentally was the same judge for the Oklahoma Indian Territory. He brought on Bass Reeves as a marshal, even though Bass Reeves could not read nor write. Bass Reeves taught himself how to read and write, and became one of the most time-honored lawmen of his time. Bass Reeves served warrants and captured over 3,000 felons. In other words, brought them back alive to court. He only shot and killed 14 out of 3,000. During his time as marshal in the Oklahoma Indian Territory, shortly after the Civil War, Bass Reeves was accused of shooting a prisoner. Now, the accounts of this were from 5 witnesses, of which 4 were formerly Confederate soldiers who stated that Bass Reeves came up, sat down at the campfire, put out a 6-gun, and shot the man. He was convicted, and he served almost 4 years in prison until it came to the attention of the judge that he worked for in the Oklahoma Indian Territory. Subsequent to that, he was released. Bass Reeves then went back to his job as marshal, and then in those times, he was accorded the most difficult of all warrants that he had to secure. None of the marshals wanted to go out and pick up Bass Reeves' son due to the fact, number one, it was the son of Bass Reeves. And number two, they were scared. it finally came down. Bass Reeves took the assignment. He went out, sought out his son, and brought him back. Yes, his son was guilty. His son beat his wife to death. But the importance of this story was the fact that when no one else would, Bass Reeves was there. Now here is the funny part. There was a TV show that appeared in the mid-1950s, I'd say 1953, 1954. The name of that program was The Lone Ranger. The story was about a masked man with a white hat, rode a white horse, had a 6-gun, shot silver bullets, and his companion was a Native American. Are you feeling the connection? The TV show, The Lone Ranger, was a story written by a man who was so honored and impressed by the story of Bass Reeves. Ladies and gentlemen, do you realize, had I known in those days that this was a TV show about a man of color? Are you kidding me? Do you know how proud I would have been? My self-worth and self-esteem? However, history is written by who? The victors. People of color are subservient, according to the law, not human beings. Sure, a white man played the part, but it was about Bass Reeves